back on 9.3 test with another match in the T49. This time we've ended up on Sacred Valley. And as you can see, the game is about 80 or 90% light tanks. This is how test has been ever since 9.3 went up. People just want to try out the new lights. There are still a few people testing out other tanks, presumably because they don't have them yet. They're trying to figure out if they want to grind them. But the vast majority of players are on the new light tanks. Now, if there's one thing on my wish list for bug fixes, it's the way that replays tend to stutter. It's been a constant annoyance trying to make these videos. Most people don't bother, and so if you watch their videos they tend to be a bit jerky, but I don't know. You guys might have better tolerance of it than me, but I just cannot stand watching a video where it's jerking around and constantly slowing down and speeding up. Anyway, because I'm not real good at playing this map ever since they changed it, I haven't quite worked out what to do yet, and because I also don't know what to do generally in light tanks, I decided to head up here, and obviously he's pre-aimed. I deliberately drove into that, which was probably not a very good life decision, but it wasn't just me being oblivious. I knew that was going to happen. I was just counting on getting my own shot off. Unfortunately it missed, but because I got some friends coming with me, I'm able to help finish him off. Now I found myself in a position here where I've got a JP2, an FCM and another T49. These guys are all holding the corner here. We have a swarm of light tanks, mostly T49s. And so while they're distracted, I pop out. The HEP rounds are quite useful against the FCM. They're not perfect, but as you can see I hit him in the front plate and still did nearly 500 damage to him, which isn't bad considering that's just an enhanced HE round. Of course if that was heat it would have killed him. So far I haven't got a really suitable replay that shows off how the heat works. The heat is definitely a safer option than the HEP because it, you know, being heat, it's a lot more likely to pen, even with its low pen value. But it can't do what I just did there, which is damage and track 2 tanks with 1 shot because they were both next to each other. The gold rounds on this, the HEP rounds, have a splash of 5.11 meters. That's, I think, about equivalent to a tier 10 batch at Arty. So, I mean, they might not always pen, they might not always do a lot of damage, but they can certainly pull off some stupid shit like that. You can splash people and break their tracks. With that said, the horrible, horrible gun handling and unimpressive cornering ability of the T49 makes me kind of not really excited to get it. I mean, it's certainly a tank that's amusing to play every now and then, but it's not something I'm going to be really grinding for. I will eventually get one, but my main goal for the new light tanks is to get the M41, the Walker Bulldog. I'm thinking about the RU251 as well. The T54 lightweight is just too much like a regular T54, but worse. There's really not enough to separate it out. There we go, we hit another light tank in the back, T49, for a huge amount of damage, and he almost kills us, but we get away with it. The reload on this gun is about 18 or 19 seconds, but you have to remember that's with a 100% crew and equipment. Without equipment or crew, it would be a lot worse. Get lucky there and manage to hit him. I mean, the accuracy on this gun, even stationary, is so bad it just cannot be relied upon. When you're moving, you basically have to joust things like an ELC. In fact, the ELC has marginally less aim bloom issues than this thing when this is turning its hull and its turret. The ELC, when it's just driving along, is slightly worse, but if you're trying to make complex maneuvers in the T49, which is what you need to do in light tanks, then your aim is worse than an ELC for most intensive purposes. maybe at point blank range it's slightly better, and the turret is an advantage, but honestly the gun handling on this just kills it, I think. And with the 90mm it's still not very good. The 90mm has rather bad penetration on every round it gets, and its gun handling still isn't anything special. So I'd be inclined to say the T49 is a one-trick pony. That one trick is the hilarious monster damage of this gun, and the ability to kill two tanks with one shot, splash my own teammate to death there. I don't think it's really a viable, so to speak, light tank. I don't think it's going to do well carrying pub matches. I don't think it's going to do well in clan wars. I think it's purely just the kind of tank you take out for a bit of a laugh once or twice, every now and then. If you want a seriously viable light tank, the Walker Bulldog, the tier 7, is it. It's a far better tank in every respect. It's faster, it's more maneuverable, it has a far better gun handling, better turret reverse speed. The gun itself has decent pen. It's a very good gun. It might not do as much damage per hit. In fact, it might take the Walker Bulldog a few seconds to crank out as much damage as this bad boy, but it's much more consistent damage. I mean, this thing is, you're playing the RNG. It's like the KV2 in a high tier match, basically. So I wouldn't trust it. I certainly wouldn't trust it if it was a situation where I was forced to carry a high tier match in my light tank. That's the kind of match where I'd be hoping for the current Chaffee, or in a T37 or T41, basically, or sorry, M41, basically the replacements for the Chaffee. They handle more or less as the Chaffee does now, just scaled for tier. The Chaffee, of course, has copped some pretty vicious nerfs just to make it less dominating than it is now, and to make it more of a stop along the way to the true endgame light tanks rather than the endgame light tank, which it used to be. Remembering, of course, that the Chaffee was the first, from what I recall, tier 5 light tank introduced to the game, and has also remained the only end of branch tier 5 light tank since the VK 2801 and the T50-2 were moved up to tier 6. The French, of course, have had high tier light tanks for quite a while. The 1390 was introduced as a tier 7. It was the first tier 7 light tank, and then moved up to tier 8. So, I mean, the Chaffee's in a pretty unique situation right now, but this is less a nerf to the Chaffee for the sake of nerfing it, because the T37 is honestly the tank the Chaffee is now. It's just got, I think, a few slightly different stats, but it plays the same. It gets roughly the same matchmaking. It's very much a replacement for the Chaffee. The down tiering is more or less just to reorganize the line and make things a little more logical. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that line ends with the M41. This is just a tank you pick up for shits and giggles. It's not really useful as a fighting tank in a high tier match. The only thing it is consistently good at is being amusing when you shoot somebody and do, 800, 900 damage to them. Now, I should add a disclaimer here. I'm saying this as somebody who's bad at light tanks and bad at anything that's really RNG reliant, like anything HE reliant. I'm bad at the 183. I don't generally do well with Hesh shells out of my Centurion, which is why I seldom use them, and I don't do well with this. I'm also not very good with Arty. Now, there are people who are very, very good with anything HE based. Broseph, who used to be in Condi, I'm not sure which clan he's in now, he's very good with Hesh. He actually shoots a lot of Hesh out of his Centurion, and more often than not it will pen. I think I've only ever seen him fuck up 1 or 2 Hesh shots. Obviously there are players who are very good with artillery. There are players who are very good with the 183. They might have a bit better luck with this tank, but I still wouldn't rely on it as something that's able to carry a high tier game. At the end of the day, aim for the M41 and just play this on test, see if you like it or not. If you don't even bother grinding it. think there's a connection between, in fact, I know there's a connection between the new American light tank line and the, actually no, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go back and look at this, but I know there's been a connection made between one of the US light tank lines and the T-54E1. I can't remember which line it is. I think it goes from the Sheridan to the T-50, or not the Sheridan, sorry, the T-49 to the T-54E1, but I could be wrong on that. Either way, it's not really worth doing that. If you're going to aim for a T-54E1 or a T-57, I would still go through the medium line, as the T-69 is a much better rounded tank and is very, very good for competitive play. It's still a favourite of tournament teams. The only real reason to ever play this thing is just for shits and giggles, and that's if you can afford to throw that much gold around. As far as the 90mm goes, I've actually got a match I want to show using the 90mm, so I'll talk more about it in that, but I'm going to say now it does not make it a very useful light tank, so that doesn't even really save it. Of course, this is the first test iteration, so things may change as Wargaming put out further iterations and rebalance things based on their performance so far in test. So this may end up being obsolete information, but as things stand, and as I believe things will stand when this does finally hit the live server, I don't think this is a particularly useful tank. And although I think the US light tanks are the best in the game across the board, and certainly the M41 I believe is the best light tank the game has ever seen, I'd say this is probably one of the worst light tanks you will see at higher tiers. The worst in the game obviously being things like the A20, and probably the Duck, if you even consider that a light tank. It's more of a heavy tank in a light tank's clothing. But I mean, it is a gimmick, it is something you can play for fun. You can make it work. It's very hard to make it work, but it can be done, so I guess there's always a challenge there for some people. But we'll see how we go. In the meantime, I would definitely say stick with the M41 as a goal. In a similar vein, I'm going to go out and say that the T-54 lightweight is basically useless for the reasons I mentioned earlier, and the reasons which will be explained in more detail in a T-54 lightweight edition video. It's just not really viable. It's not different enough to make it useful. The other light tanks will have something going for them, it doesn't. It's just essentially a shitty T-54 that maintains camo on the move, just as this is a shitty KV-2 with a really, really high top speed and smaller size. I know those are kind of not the best descriptions you'll get, but those are really how I would describe them. They're gimmicks. Anyway, thanks for watching, and there will be a couple more videos from 9.3 first test iteration on the way. I've actually got a couple queued up to record right now, and then we'll return to your regular programming, which is catching up on all the games which I recorded way back in February and March and still haven't got around to uploading or making public yet.